Hi, everybody. It's Bob Ost. It's Friday. It's April, what is it? The 26th, April 26th. And this is the TRU Community Gathering. For those of you who are just stumbling upon us out there in YouTube land, we're an arts organization. Theater Resources Unlimited is an arts services organization. We basically help and guide theater professionals in the business of theater, and we teach things like how to write a musical. We teach playwriting. We give bunch of boot camps about producing itself and how to raise money. So we do all that sort of stuff. But we also do this Friday thing that you've come across today. On Fridays, started back in April 17th, 2020, the beginning of COVID, when I realized that I couldn't do any of my programming live because we were told you can't go out of your apartment. So that makes it kind of hard to do programs and workshops and panels. So I didn't know what to do, and I seriously considered closing the company. I thought, well, what am I going to do now? I had no idea. But somebody held my hand and said, Bob, I want you to meet Zoom. And I said, what is Zoom? And they explained it to me, and they walked me through it. And I asked people that I knew, my theater friends, my TRU members, whether they wanted to get together on Fridays and just have a community, while we were in isolation. And I got a unanimous yes from the community. So we've been doing this ever since. This is, I think, our 205th or 206th. I keep forgetting to count before I started the show. I think it's the 206th consecutive week of community gatherings. And they've sort of evolved since 2020. 4 years later, thank God we're talking about something different. We're not talking about surviving a pandemic anymore. We're talking about theater and art. And we're talking in the assumption that we're back in live performance and that we're back to something resembling a normal world. I say this every week, so people are sick of me saying it, but got to remind you that COVID's still here. It's not as dangerous, but it's still here. So be conscious and be careful and be considerate of the people around you. I like to find things, topics that are just really different for us, and that extend the vocabulary, the theater vocabulary of what our conversations generally are. And today I'm fulfilling a wish. I'm actually having somebody who's not involved in theater per se at all. We're going to have a German orchestral theater conductor, Maestro Christoph Schlüren, and I'm going to bring him into the room right now, and you're going to meet him. Hi, Christoph. Welcome to TRU. Welcome to the community gathering. So, Christoph, it's odd. It's odd, isn't it, that a theater company, a theater organization like mine wants to bring you in and have a conversation with you about the theatrical aspect of orchestra conducting. What did you think when I first told you that I was going to talk about all that? Did you think, oh, what is this? What is this guy talking about?
It's for me, it is. It makes sense that you ask this question because of what you do. So I would say, and we have here lots of friends in your community who are used to be in interdisciplinary way with all these things. And yeah, particularly the musical, you have this teamwork. Yeah? The whole West Side Story was a teamwork. The symphonic dances from West Side Story, we can hear it today in concert, have not been orchestrated by Bernstein. They have been controlled by him. And so, but a performance, a conducting performance, I would say, of course, ideally, there is no theatricality about it.
Yes, you started to hint at that before when we were talking.
What does that mean? What does that mean? I mean, if you think about actors, so actors have to express something, and it has to go with the plot. So it has to make sense what they express. And there has to be correlation between actors, between their actions and so on. So then we are amidst the field that's not different. Then there are a lot of things that are different we can discuss or we can look at. But basically, there's nothing odd with the question. It's just coming from another perspective.
Well, thank you. I was hoping that you would feel that way. I was hoping you wouldn't think, "Oh my God, what is this guy talking about?" So I appreciate that.
If I would come with a specific aim to say something here, and then I could get irritated. But I come in here because I want to understand how we can be in contact and how we can find out what you want to know.
Well, thank you. And we're gonna start with something easy. We're gonna talk about you a little bit and your background. And the other thing that I want you to know that I'm planning on talking about is what it's like to be in the arts in Germany versus how we experience it here in New York. And in America in general, but in New York, America is really not very arts friendly. I don't know if you.
I can tell you there's an interesting story. I just read the autobiography of Angel Brusilov, who was the concertmaster of the Philadelphia Orchestra under Ormandy, and who then he wanted to become himself a conductor, and he did it, and all the problems that arose. And there's one interesting thing. He was from Philadelphia, and he wanted to found.
Me too.
Yeah, he wanted to found a new orchestra in the 1960s there, a chamber orchestra called the Chamber Symphony of Philadelphia. Yeah, no, changing the perspective. When we had in Munich the Münchner Kammerorchester, which is Munich Chamber Orchestra, they got into deep financial problems. And then all the large orchestra in the city of Munich, they would vote for them to stay there and do some writing to the mayor and all these things. They want to have this multitude of orchestras here, but because they are funded by the state or by the city or by whatever. In Philadelphia, this Chamber Symphony of Philadelphia was a threat to the Philadelphia Orchestra because there is not more money. There is only the money for this orchestra. And if you want to have from the same sources some money, you are an enemy.
So actually, the arts in general in New York and everywhere,
privately,
we're very competitive.
Sorry, because
we're very competitive because of what you said. Basically, we don't have proper funding. We don't have proper support by our government. Our country is not an arts friendly country. It's an arts tolerant country. I'll give it at least that much. But I don't think it particularly nurtures the arts. There are pockets. I mean, we have our government, our New York state government has increased the funding to the arts this year. They just announced a new budget, which it's not enough, but it's more, and it's more than we're used to getting. So it looks a little bit more hopeful in some ways. I didn't really say in my introduction to you, I didn't really say that you were the founder of Germany's Symphonia Momentum. Is correct? Is that
Yeah.
That's right? And I think you work with the Deutsche Kammerakademie Neuss on Rhein, Neuss on Rhein, and St. Michel Strings Mikkeli. How do you say that? Mikkeli?
St. Michael Strings in Mikkeli. That's Finnish.
Mikkeli. Oh, that's Finnish. So
Yeah.
you actually have been in more orchestras than just in Germany, just in Munich. You've been.
Yeah, basically there is one important orchestra I want to mention. It was called, it's very funny, it is in Tarragona, in Catalonia.
Oh.
Maybe 3/4 of an hour from Barcelona. And this orchestra was founded by a very gifted conductor and organizer, still young, and he did it as an opera touring orchestra. And then it grew because he had a good hand for it. And they were called Orchestra Kammeramusike. And then it grew so large that they called themselves Orchestra Symphonica Kammeramusike, which was a very crazy name. And now they changed. They are the Franz Schubert Philharmonie, situated in Tarragona, and they are one of the more constant orchestras I work with. A phenomenal orchestra. People say it is individually, from the qualities, maybe the best orchestra in whole Spain. And
So,
I can agree to that.
so what I wanted, I guess what I'm edging towards is I wanted to find out what the life is like in Germany versus here in terms of founding an orchestra. How you founded the Symphonia Momentum. How did that happen? What was that about? What was the process?
It's not so fantastic privileged position you have here. The orchestra is not funded by any state or city or anything. So we don't get funds. We just get people who are interested and support the orchestra. It's just like in the States.
So
Many,
for us, the equivalent, since most of us here are in theater rather than in the classical music world, that would be like a small theater company. Somebody would be founding a small theater company. This is how big is your orchestra? How big is Symphonia
depends.
Momentum?
It is normally it's a string orchestra. Then it's small. It's about 20 players.
Mm-hmm.
But then we have some additional wind, and it depends. But it's a chamber symphony.
And what is the business model for something like that? How did you create it, and how do you sustain it?
It is ad hoc. It depends. In some year we don't play a concert. In other years we play more.
Oh, ad hoc. Yes, it's not. Yes, I see. As needed.
Yes,
So,
and I have some very able and very strong musicians who are in the main positions. And for every project, they bring in some people who are very good. So what is needed there is that you have to be on an international level, because most very good players will be in an orchestra, members of an orchestra, a constant orchestra, after some time at least. When they are young, they are free. Then they play for positions in orchestras, and they are taken over. Then they don't have the time anymore, only sometimes. And so we always have to look for some good people everywhere. And therefore, I could say I have my spies. Yeah, they are very, very good musicians themselves. And they look around and then they tell me, you could take this viola from, we had the Latvian viola living in London, or so these things are then happening. And then we get very good players. Sometimes also we get a player where we say we will not reinvite him. That can happen. For lack of fire or for whatever. Yeah.
Well, that goes back to one of my premises for this is putting together an orchestra and conducting. Does it have any similarities or any equivalencies to a director in theater? A director in theater has to put together all of the actors. All the parts are taken by actors. It's vocal. It's words. It's not music. You have to put together a collective of musicians, and let me go back to something. How did you start your career? What was your original ambition, and how did you find your way through the art world, the classical music world?
Special. That makes it special because I was never interested in the mainstream of conducting. That means just to do the repertoire that is there, that is done by everybody, and you try to cope with them and to have your standing in this world of doing Brahms and Tchaikovsky, and all these composers are phenomenal. That's not the point. But they are played everywhere and sometimes very good. And very often
that's another question I've always had in my head, which is if you are conducting an orchestra in a piece that has been done many, many times before, how do you find your voice in it? How do you find the way to communicate it in your way?
Okay, here we go in medias. You must understand that is a core question of the whole way to live the art. Yeah, that means I cannot speak for others, and today we have a phenomenon which I would even say I refuse. The phenomenon is that young conductors listen to many, many recordings with the score at hand, and then try to pick out things they like and to do some things in another way. The problem is this will never lead to your own way of doing it. And so I had a teacher who insisted on the very hard way Just read the score and get your imagination. And listen, don't listen to anything. You can listen when the piece has become your own. Then you can listen to somebody else. And I must say that all the great musicians I met basically follow this advice. That means they are directly in contact with the stuff, which is still hypothetic because it's just to read and to imagine how it sounds. And of course, in the beginning, this is very dry and very hard because it's not a script like in theater. Because you have to imagine how this whole orchestra, all the staves sound together. Of course, you will not be able in the beginning. So you look which voice is important here, which voice is important here, how do they coincide, and all these things. So you're starting from core and not from listening what others have produced with their accomplished instruments of orchestras. Yeah. And so I would say that to make it my own is basically it's a difficult way to say, because we are always on this knife edge between so-called how to say in German we have Texttreue. That means you just stay with the musical science and text in the most, people would say, objective manner. And then you have so-called interpretation, which means everything up to random freedom and everything. Yeah. So you have to find your way that you get the text of the composer as authentic as possible, melting with it yourself. So it is not your voice, but it is your way to express the world of this composer. And if you find your way, all the people who did it in a serious way, they have their own way to express it, but not because they want to do something different, because they are different.
Well,
So
I mean,
to
talk about the obvious things, there are differences in tempo. I mean, you can take tempos in different ways, and still within the intention of the composer. It can be a little faster, a little slower. You can also, for me, one of the things that I discovered listening to different orchestras play the same pieces, I hear inner voices. I hear voicings that I hadn't noticed before, and sometimes it just sounds like a completely different piece in some ways. It's like, wow, it never sounded like that to me before.
Yes.
So there are specifics that you're working with. I mean, a director's working with dialogue, actor interaction, some of the same things. There's tempo, there's pacing for a director, and there's tempo for a conductor, and it always fascinates me to hear music in a whole different way than I was used to hearing it, or I'll listen to something, an interpretation of a classical piece, and I'll go, gee, I didn't like that before. Why do I like it now? And this happens more than once. I was talking to you earlier about last night. I was at New York Philharmonic, and Gustave Dudamel had to step in at the last minute to replace the original conductor for the evening. So he only had a week to work. I think he had a week to work with the orchestra. And one of the things he played was Bolero, and I thought, this must be torture. This is one of the things he said that you probably would not embrace and want to do yourself. You're looking for music that's a little less known than that. But
no. I always look to combine very well-known music with unknown music. That means not to go into the niche, we call it, into the corner of the unknown, where people meet and they make some expert exchange about the unknown and so on. But to show that great unknown music can stand alongside great well-known music. That's very important because it gives it its real worth and its real stature.
Well, last night we had Ravel followed by Ginastera. So
Ginastera, what did they play?
It was a violin. It was a violin concerto.
There is only one violin concerto. It's very difficult.
Yeah. Hilary Hahn played it, and she was
yes.
dazzling. She was dazzling.
Yes, she is. And the Ginastera, I mean, Ginastera is now one of the 3-4 most famous Latin American composers, alongside with Villalobos, with Chavez, with Revueltas. So those, I would say, are the 4, and of course Piazzolla. But this is what he made his place in the world of classical music. But his music is very complicated and very difficult, and it has also, it's kind of not easy to get in contact with side, particularly a piece like the Violin Concerto. It is it's so mosaic-like structure of such different things, and everything in 12th tone. So in the most complicated manner of melody and harmony, yeah. So
Oh,
it
yes.
is. This is a special challenge. There are many interesting things about these challenges, because the challenge of a Piazzolla piece finally is not greater than of a Mozart piece. It's different. That means in a piece like Ginastera, to get it any sense at all is a quite difficult step. But if you go in depth, in the Mozart is maybe more difficult to do it really well, because things are more obvious.
Exactly. An audience can tell the difference there.
Not only an audience, everybody hears it.
Yeah.
Because when you ask some composers, of course, we have many, as we heard before, hardcore modernists, and they are so much in this hardcore modernism world that they would never question it. But if you take a step out, you can say what this English symphonist Robert Simpson said, oh, so his music always is dissonant. And he said that due to all these dissonances, which are fantastic, we have lost the real clear, strong harmonic effects that were there until the beginning of the modernism. And that's interesting. So you win something and you lose something. And that is how it always works with the development of style in the arts. Doesn't matter where. I mean, a painter like Delacroix is not better than Giotto, and a painter like Cézanne is not better than Delacroix. They are all great, but you get something and you lose something. Yeah.
Well, it's specific aesthetics. There are just different artists have their own aesthetic, and I think what makes them great is that they are true to their own aesthetic. That they're not really hopefully not. They don't seem like they're imitating someone else. Someone else's style. Drew Rieger in the room says bolero is torture for the bass player, which is one of my premises that I was going to start with you, was just the fact that bolero must be such torture for so many of the players in that orchestra, having to do the same thing again and again and again and again.
I disagree. If it's a boring performance, I would agree, but I don't believe that Dudamil's performance was boring. I would say, first of all, Bolero is a totally untypical Ravel piece. He himself considered it an experiment, and he was very unhappy that it became his most successful piece. So speaking about aesthetics, I would say in Bolero, he followed an aesthetic. But in his other music, he followed his inner need, which also you can call an aesthetic, but from the root of what happens, it is what he had to say. And in Bolero, he said, I do something without, so this constant ostinato running through, and everything in the same tonality until at some point, which is the climax, it changes also the tonality, and then it comes very, very soon to an end in high dynamics. So this is an aesthetic, and for example, 12th tone composition is an aesthetic. An aesthetical device and a technical device also. Yeah. So it's not something that comes by nature out of somebody. It is a device you take to get into a kind of language.
You basically it's an interpretive part of your brain, because 12 tone requires a set of rules that you have to understand and you have to follow. There's a lot of freedom within that. I know different people who write in 12 tone have completely different ways of using it and sound different. But nevertheless, it does seem like you have to really understand what you're doing to write in 12 tone.
It's very simple. I can explain you the great aspect and the poor aspect of dodecaphony. It's very easy to explain, because until that time, the formal span of a composition depended on the harmonic changes. That means you start in a harmony and you with your themes, which are, I would say, the themes or motifs are kind of, in a movie, the protagonists. And the harmony is the basic plot, leading from this harmony to this harmony, stations in the movie, situations in the movie. And so you build up a large form, like you have it very obviously from Bach on, but in Bruckner, for example, you have it very, very obviously, or in Beethoven, or in Schubert, and so on. To build in Chopin, for example, also totally convincing. Chopin was one of the greatest writers concerning large form. And so if you build up a large form, it means you go from there to there, you go away from the beginning, and at some point you go back to the beginning and get it in balance, beginning and end, so to say. In 12th tone, all this dimension of coming from somewhere and going somewhere is erased, because from the beginning you are everywhere. You have all the 12 tones in, as Schoenberg says, in the most possible democratic manner from the beginning. And so that means you cannot go anywhere because you are everywhere. Yeah. And that means, in consequence, what Anton Webern did, it can become very short forms and very complicated. Large forms are very difficult to build convincingly with the 12-tone technique. And there are some kinds of forms which work better, like variation form, where you have the same again and again, but in other colors, in other ornaments and so on, or kind of rondo form. But the forms developing dynamically from beginning to end are in a way erased. Of course, it might happen that some people try still to find the way to build large forms, but it is not, basically it's not possible due to the 12-tone technique. It is, for example, in music by Alban Berg, it is because he also uses very tonal aspects that become very clear to the listener and are kind of signposts along the way. Your picture is not anymore in the center, and mine also not.
So what? Our picture?
And now you are centered again. Yeah.
Oh, I think I'm leaning over towards it. That's all. I'm here.
Yeah. So I hope this didn't lead too far away from what you want to know.
No, I want to know all of it because I love music and I'm very interested in all of it. And I actually write music, so I don't think I'm ever going to tiptoe into 12-tone writing, but it's interesting to hear about it from you.
There's nothing wrong with it. It's just it has its consequences, like all the
yeah, it has its consequences indeed. I want to go back to some of my earlier questions, and I just want to follow your path. How do you have a career as a conductor? How did that happen? If somebody here in, I mean, I actually have a friend. We were a fiscal sponsor for an orchestra here in New York. A young guy who wanted to put together an orchestra, and it was actually an opera company, but he conducted the orchestra. What was the process like? What were the steps that led you to when did you decide you wanted to be a composer, and how did you find your way there?
A composer I had been when I was
conductor.
I was composing when I was at school, and then I showed these compositions to a great conductor, Sergio Celibidache. He was the chief conductor in Munich. He was the greatest conductor I ever met, I must say. In Anglo-Saxon countries, he is not considered very highly. I can see some reasons for that, but whatever. He was chief conductor of the Berlin Philharmonic after the war, because they said he is a political virgin. And then he became he left the Berlin Philharmonic in 1952, and then he went around. He went to Mexico and to Italy and to all the European states and so on, and to Japan and so on, but never to the US, by the way. And he was a totally radical person. He would absolutely refuse to do recordings, because he would say that when you listen to, we have a different tempo in every room, because we adjust our tempo and our sound to the room in a unique way always. When you listen in your bathroom to what we did, it's totally wrong. So he would say, the record has made us poorer in our perceptivity. And then he, most importantly, he would recur on saying, we have the retention factor. That means, it's very interesting. When you ask people, what is your favorite recording of this and this and this? They will say something, and you will most of the time find out that this is what they heard first. And this is, of course, a bit of a problem due to the record, because you listen so often to the same. So in an ideal world, you would always listen live. But of course, what we cannot ignore is that you cannot not everybody has access to listening to music live and to orchestras particularly. And so recordings make their sense, but they are not the same as the real situation. So they are a kind of, let's say, fictionalized reality. And the more sensitive the musician is, the more disturbing this fact is for him, of course, because he was really doing it under these singular conditions now, and listens to it later under totally different conditions. And it's still the same, but not the same. That means it doesn't sound the same, but it is the same performance recorded. So he would say, it is like, would you prefer to go with a photo of your beloved to bed or with herself? Yeah, so this man, I got to know, and he was looking at my compositions, and he would say that you have to learn this in the right way. Come to me. And then from 1981, I was studying for 16 years with Celebidache. I studied some other things, my instrument, musicology, and so on. But I was with him for 16 years until he died. And he made such a high demand that nobody of his students could cope with that. So everybody was totally, he was not a pedagogue and not this kind of teacher. Everybody was totally in a place where mistrusting themselves, and also a lot of envy between the pupils, and so many things that happened because he didn't give anybody the feeling that he is now where he can really start. So he would also always be extremely critical. So when I had finished, I felt totally not up to this. And so I went a totally different way. I started to work with, but in this case, world-class musicians, but only with pianists, with violinists, with string quartets, with chamber groups. And so we always tried with a lot of time to get the best possible results we could get. And at the same time, I was always very interested in having repertoire that is taken from the grave and back into life. Yeah. From the grave of libraries. Yeah. And so I grew into conducting with these groups. I had learned conducting, but I didn't practice it directly because I saw this danger of going into this and making the normal career. So I would say I'm not interested in career. I never was, but career, I would say there is something very positive about career, and why you have to make a career is you can do what you want. That is the reason to make a career, and of course also to earn money, of course. These are the two aspects. So for me, it is absolutely clear. I do everything I can to be able to do what I want to do.
And that we relate to here in New York too. That's basically how all of us live our lives. We do things so that we can afford to do what we want to do.
Yeah.
Career
gives the space and freedom for that. The better the career, the more.
To touch on a few things that you just said, I do want to say that last night when it was the first time I heard Bolero live in an auditorium in a hall, and it was a completely different experience than listening to it on a record. The live performance is never going to be the same on any recording.
I mean, Dudamel is a most physical conductor.
He is. That's what I was going to ask you about, because he put his entire body into every moment of everything he conducted.
He is very naturally rhythmical. That is his strongest side. The strongest side of everything he does is rhythm. He's fantastic.
And what is your strength?
I don't want to compare. I never like to compare, but therefore, I would say that my concentration goes to harmonic development and to large form. To hold, like to converge large form, to get maximum position in a piece, and to get maximum solution in the piece. So of course you cannot do that with the 12-tone piece. Then you have to go another way. That's very interesting always, but it doesn't attract me the same. I'm most attracted by composers who really, first of all, who are emotionally totally authentic. This is what I would say about this Nicolas Flagello. He was, if I have to put it in words, he was a kind of Tchaikovsky of the 20th century. He bearing his soul open to everybody. Fantastic. And he was totally neglected because he was considered old-fashioned. I would say the word romantic is totally misleading. This is just to label these people. And of course, we have kind of romantics, neo-romantics. Yeah, we have them today more than ever. In the film music industry, we have a lot of neo-romanticism and so on, but we had it always a bit. Samuel Barber had tendencies, but I would also not call him a romantic. He was much too modern in other ways, but he was very approachable. But this Flagello and also his teacher Giannini, they came from Italian bel canto. They were children of emigres. They grew up in a surrounding that was totally against the unfolding of their natural soul quality. So Flagello would once say that I am an Italian lost in the concrete, between the concrete buildings of this city. But I would to go back, that means authentic, intense emotional expressivity is something I love. And the other thing is, if somebody is able to build something that really makes sense as a whole, which is not the same. You can be very emotional and it makes no sense. Or you can build something and it's cold.
This brings me to my abstract question. Since music is an abstract form, how do you determine what the feeling and the meaning is of music? How do you know? We have words in theater. We know what the words are saying. We know what the emotions are of the characters. There are certain tempo instructions, indications that give you an idea of what the feeling was of the composer when he was writing it. But in general, how do you translate music into communication of an emotion?
It is the question. It is the question. So I would say that, first of all, it seems easier to go with language than with sound, because we are all used to go with language, and because there is no polyphony of language. When I speak, when you speak, it makes no sense. So everybody speaks alone. That's totally different from music. Yeah. So, but of course, in music, this is organized. And we could also speak that you make do, and I say something to that. Yeah, we can do that, but it's not polyphony. Yeah. So that means that it seems much easier to understand poetry, language, and so on the first look. But then there's one thing with the words. If you take words, not a word like chair or like the lamp, or no, a word like freedom or a word like love, or everybody has another idea of it. And suddenly it becomes much more difficult with language, because to get a so-called objective result, because we all interpret words in our way. And you can see this in politics, for example, with the same words, totally antagonizing things are expressed. You can also see it in arts. You can see it everywhere. In newspapers, it doesn't matter. And when people are fighting, everybody thinks he's right. And they will fight for totally opposite things with language. So that means that what seems to be so easily accessible also shows off like something not very clearly structured. More like I can tune in, or I can tune out, or I can tune against it, but whatever words can, even we have some words we don't like, we feel allergic, and so on. So it's very interesting. With sound, we have a totally other thing. Of course, if you don't understand how to go with it, it's very abstract. But on the other hand, it is never a question of to interpret this sound. That means if you have a C minor chord in a particular instrumentation, followed by a G major chord in a particular orchestration, you have a kind of relation between them, a kind of tension. Musicology today say
give me a second. Can anybody in the put something into the chat to tell me whether Christoph's screen was freezing or was mine? Could you tell? Well, I just want to make sure my Wi-Fi is okay. Okay, you're back now. You had frozen for a bit.
I was frozen.
Yeah, for like a moment, couple moments.
Audio or video?
Say it again.
The audio?
No, just the audio, and the picture.
Okay.
So did that happen to anybody else, or is it my computer, guys? Anybody in the room? Just write me a note. Somebody, anybody? All right. So I don't know what's going on. I'm just going to assume that you're.
Okay.
So it's something. Okay. So they're saying something happened with mine. With mine. Okay.
Yes. So with music, I would say basically it's very important that you distinguish between the world of sound and what you maybe call music, because we would not call every sound music, but this is a very large latitude of things that can happen. So there are lots of sounds we don't hear at all. So they are not of any significance for us. Below 16, above 20,000, yeah, so it's not, but the whole cosmos is full of them, yeah. So we could say everywhere is music, and music follows its laws of Schwingung, what is the word? Of continual frequency and all these things. So of interrelation between the sounds and so on. So what you have to learn when you really study composition or conducting or piano particularly, or organ, or any instrument finally, what you should learn and what you normally don't really learn, because why don't people learn that? Because they are concerned with the particular challenges of their instrument, or of their direction in the music. Yeah, so a viola player will practice with his fingers, with his ear, to be in tune, to understand the rhythms and all these things. And if you don't really lead him, he will not understand how he has to interact in chamber music. So this is a completely different thing from learning the instrument, from learning the gesture of conducting, even from learning the techniques of composing. In composing, you are closest to it because you create the thing. But as soon as you just use the thing, you have to recreate it. But what means to recreate? Basically, I would say the musician, he has the task that he has to bring to life again what has been experienced by the composer and is brought to the paper as a kind of strange transcript, and you have to bring it again to the same life as he experienced. This is, of course, something you can never prove. But as we saw, we have God is among us today. You cannot also not prove God. It's very interesting. People tried for decades, for centuries to prove God. It's not possible. And so many things are not possible. So all the things we experience directly, we cannot prove because just we experience it. And this we have to learn from well-educated people to give us hints to find our way in the jungle of the scores.
Well, let me ask you this. Have there been moments, have there been scores that you've looked at that you had a hard time figuring out what the feeling was of the piece?
Definitely. Definitely.
So
and there are scores where I could not figure it out. But I would be very critical about that. You can also go to this score in a purely technical way to approach it, and then you will never have this question. That means this is a particular challenge you give yourself. I want to go under the skin of the composer, so to say. Yeah.
Well, there were a couple of touchstones of emotion in music. I mean, there's a difference in a feeling of a minor chord and a major chord. There is a feeling of resolution when you go into a fourth or a fifth up into a resolution. There is the oddity of the tritone. The tritone has a feeling to it. There are things that we can identify, but that doesn't really account for 99% of what you're interpreting.
These principles are very easily explainable, by the way. But it goes beyond this meeting we have here. But you can.
It's too much for this meeting.
It's very interesting because you speak about the tritone. The tritone is among all the 12 tones the farthest from the origin. Yeah, that means if you're in the tritone, you are. But what means farthest? In fifth steps. And everything is fifth related. And this we have to learn again. It's true. Tonality is fifth related. And you have two directions, upper fifth and lower fifth direction. And if you go in both directions, you meet at the tritone. It is the farthest from both sides. This is, of course, only possible because we have so-called well-tempered tuning, which was necessary for polyphony. That means that every chord is not one chord is really in good tuning, but in perfect tuning, but every chord is in acceptable tuning. That's on the piano or in the organ. Then you have string players, they have to always to retune that it sounds better. It's very difficult things that happen there. But basically, for our affective system, affective, emotional, yeah, we follow unconsciously fifths going down and fifths going up and experience something within that. But of course, there are so many things happening at the same time that every situation becomes different. So you have to understand the principles of harmony. Why? As a listener, you don't have to understand, but as a person who performs the music, you should understand. Because what do you get from that? You know where you are. Very simple. You were at the beginning and you know, I'm not there and I'm not there. And there's a difference if you look at the score and say, I started in C major and I'm now in A flat major, or if you really experience it, that's the difference. That means you hear this A flat major in relation to the C major, even if lots of things are between. And this is what I would say is what we need to understand the larger form and the coherence of form. So things very easily spoken about, but normally not really practiced, only theoretically.
Well, let me ask you this: how much thought do you put into what the feeling is when you're approaching a new score? Do you? I'm sure you must put a lot into it, but do you let the music just take you where it's going, or do you look at it and think, the composer probably may mean this or that, or it's a mystery to me. I mean, a conductor, I have incredible respect for conductors because you are dealing with such a complicated score. There's so many aspects in a score, and you're making sense of it and creating music that communicates to the rest of us dummies out here who have no idea what you're going through to get to the point where you can
Okay, but it's
communicate
the
it.
same if you speak with a physicist or whatever, you have the same problem. Yeah, that is, we have to respect that there is a sphere of craft that we don't understand. Of course, yeah, that doesn't make us better. So we could also call the researcher in science also maestro. He is also maestro in his field. Yeah. And you are also maestro in organizing, in putting all these things together. It is very impressive, the community you have of all such educated, curious, and open people. Yeah, so it is fantastic. And so I would say, yeah, it seems that the conductor has such complicated thing, and it's true. It depends on the music. A pianist has the same complicated things, but only on one instrument, which is different. Yeah, he has his 10 fingers and he has to do it with them on one instrument.
I think
But
Hilary
if
Hahn
you
has
say
more
that
than
the
10
pianist,
fingers.
if you would say that it is easier for the pianist to do this, to bring it to life, it's totally wrong. Of course, it is more complicated with so many instruments that you have to be balanced and melting into each other and confronting each other and everything. Yes, but the pianist is playing on an instrument which is without expressivity, and he has to bring in all these things, colors and everything that are not there by nature. And there are many pianists who play there who have no unfolding of colors at all. So his task is at least the same challenging.
The irony, of course,
If
is
I come,
the piano is a percussive instrument.
it is a percussive
And
instrument. Yeah.
the challenge is to make it sing.
To make it sing. Yeah, exactly what Murray Peraya said in some interviews in a very, very interesting way. And Peraya, by the way, said something fantastic. He said, I never think about the emotion. It comes. And that I can totally agree. If you go into the music and you let it evolve, this emotion unfolds, because sound is always, if you have this sound and this sound, it immediately creates emotion in you. Then it depends on how you get it in connection, this stronger, this weaker, and all these things that you need. And this, yeah, the voice leading and all these things.
Yeah, I was going to say, but it sounds like it would unfold for you. I mean, as you're working on it, it sounds like things would unfold. I'm sure, don't you go through experiences where you go, oh, that inner voicing is meaningful. I want that to be a little bit more prominent. I want that to talk to the audience.
Yeah, we have done a Mendelssohn fugue from 14-year-old Mendelssohn. And of course, you can see what is the main voice. So it is a real 5-part polyphony. It's fantastic, very complicated. But then you have to not only to find the main voice, the main opposing voice, and maybe the third important voice. And all these things you bring in relation, it can be extremely complicated. But what I want to say is this respect for an orchestra conductor. Yes, okay. There is, for example, a completely different challenge having a string orchestra or an orchestra. And it is not easier to play well with a string orchestra than with a large orchestra, or than with a wind orchestra. It's not easier because, particularly in the string orchestra, if you don't create the colors that are potentially there, that means it sounds like brass, it sounds like winds, and so on. It's very boring. And you would, after 2 pieces, you would say, oh, it's only strings. I like it more with the large orchestra. So it is also not less a challenge, because the colors you have in the orchestra make it easier than the colors you have to create with the strings or with the piano. You don't have to create. If you don't do it, it's boring.
It's funny, the more you talk, the more I'm convinced that it is very similar to a director of a play, a director of a musical, or director. Any person who's taking a lot of disparate parts and putting them together into a whole so that they can communicate an experience to an audience.
Yeah.
it just reminds me so much of what you're saying.
Yeah, and then in let's say on the theater for the ego, it is easier because you say something and no one else says something at the same moment. But in the orchestra, there are a lot of people who are like, yeah, tortured, you say, yeah, only doing this and all the time, and yeah, so yeah,
The poor
yeah.
people
And
playing
they don't know,
bolero.
they don't understand the sense because they are sitting amidst it and they cannot hear the result. Yeah.
Don't
It's
get me
also
wrong, by the way. I just want to go on the record. Bolero was spectacular last night. It was spectacular, but I just couldn't help but empathize with the string players for the first 10 minutes of it. Plunk, 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 plunk. Um, for but you said you indicated earlier that you disagreed with me on that because you said that you think that they can be connected to that music, even they're part of a clockwork. You compared it to clockwork.
that's the word by Ravel. He spoke about the orchestra as like I work like a clock work constructor. Uhrmacher. I don't know what in English.
I'm
The
not sure.
person who builds the clock.
Clockmaker.
A clockmaker. Yeah, sorry.
Clockmaker.
Easier than
Pretty easy, yes. So I want to get back to something that I keep starting to ask you or have asked you, which can you talk about? I'm sure there's not one thing that was the hardest, but one of the hardest pieces that for you to grasp and embrace and communicate to your orchestra and make into an experience. And also, can you talk about one of the greatest personal triumphs that you've ever had, a score that you thought that you had just brought to life in exactly the way you'd hoped to?
okay.
I'm sure there's more than one. I'm sure there's more than one.
I have to say that most of the time something is happening because you have so many musicians, and so finally you will say, okay, it was wonderful, but yeah, but this doesn't matter. You will not communicate to them. This is what you keep for you, yeah, because I don't want to give them the feeling the work they did with all the dedication was not worth it. Absolutely not. But if you speak about my triumph, then I would say I had it with, you find it online, but it's better on the recording. I had it with Bruckner Quintet we did for string orchestra. Almost everything worked. We had, and I will not say whom, we had one musician in the orchestra or two who were not really dedicating themselves totally. So I can imagine that in this group, which I will not mention, we could have had more fire, which would have risen the whole result even more. Yeah. But apart from that, and such a thing always you have, most of the time, not always, but most of the time, somebody doesn't really fit in, and so yeah. So, okay. Apart from that, it was wonderful. And also I did in Barcelona, we did this symphony by a great, totally unknown German symphonist, Martin Scherber, Zodiac Symphony. That means a symphony in one movement in 12 sections, built on one motive and its counterpoints, like Kunst der Fuge by Bach, Art of the Fugue, in that way, but built over 66 minutes. And the orchestra created this momentum in one movement. And it was, to some degree from the beginning, that I only had to act like, I would say, like a football trainer standing aside the players. Only small hints. The orchestra was so aware and so dedicated. It was like a wonder from the beginning. And we had only 3 large rehearsals for this totally unknown piece. We did world premiere after 65 years after the composition. And I had the feeling it went by itself. I didn't intrude. It unfolded. And that I can say, that's a dream. Yeah? Not every music is in the same way, is composed in the way that this can happen so easily, because this composer is someone who lets the music grow. So if we take this fantastic flagello, who is really one of my absolute closest to my heart composers, there is much more drama. So you have to bring the house to burn, of course. Yeah, but this is in the music. When you really go into the music, it will burst out. So I can say I would not call it triumph. I would call it fulfillment.
Fulfillment, okay.
And the feeling of real freedom, because you have the fight, the struggle for realizing it is transcended. And that is fantastic. So the musicians, the best thing is if you can have your musicians totally in self-responsibility, but not in selfish way. Yeah.
I've just remembered another theater connection that I wanted to explore with you, because you talk about being programming your concerts dramaturgically, that you are aware of being a dramaturg when you put pieces together for a concert. Can you talk a little bit about that? And then I'm also going to let the audience, everybody out there, you can put questions into the chat, please. And I don't know how much time you have. Will you have time if people want to ask you questions? I mean, it's late for you. It's got to be like 12.
For me, it doesn't matter. It's just for you, it matters. Then I will, of course, go with you. Oh. I have we have forgotten to answer the one question about the most challenging music first.
Okay.
You still want to know it?
Yes.
So I cannot say that. I cannot say that because, and this is not a kind of switch, yeah, so to say, yeah, so kind of coquetry. But I mean that to do a fantastic Mozart, or to do a fantastic Bruckner, or to do a fantastic modern piece, really modern piece, hardcore modern, in its way, it's everything is, because the thing is, I can tell you one little story which makes it the point clear in one parameter. When I was also writing a lot, or I still am writing a lot about music, and I discovered for me this British symphonist Robert Simpson, who I quoted before, and there's a clarinet quintet by him, and I thought this quartet on this clarinet play fantastic this music. They must be phenomenal musicians. And then I heard the same quartet with some Haydn quartets. They were out of tune. They were mediocre, the performances. And so I have to say that the easier it becomes, the more difficult it becomes, because you hear everything. And so we come back to the real challenge is Mozart. Schubert, even more. Schubert is a total challenge. Schubert, because it's very interesting. Mozart is a very practical kind of person. He totally knew what he did. Everything works. It's just the most professional thing you can imagine, beyond everything else he has. Pure genius in every second. But then you have Schubert, and you have this difficulty to get the Schubert sound. On the piano, in the orchestra, it's everywhere the same problem. The instruments were totally different at the time. But not only this, we have lots of pieces by Schubert where later people orchestrated them. And now we have a very interesting phenomenon. Same happened with Beethoven, the same happened with Mozart, and so on. There is not one of these orchestrators got the Schubert sound. I only know one piece, very small form, where the orchestrator achieved a sound that really sounds like Schubert. This is Anton Webern. He did some German dances for little orchestra, and this sounds Schubertian. But all the symphonies and all these things, they never sound Schubertian, because his world of natural feeling was totally uncommon. And also the way we play Schubert today is, I would say, just too straight away. It's, if I do, for example, a piece like this Fifth Symphony by Schubert, which is so light and so accessible and so beautiful and so on. If we don't feel when we do it, it is really for the first and only time we play it now. It will be somewhere not really interesting. So your commitment to this world is much more important And I don't see they say in other things it's not so important. Then to 20th century music, because it's closer to us. The sound is more our sound and so on. Yeah. So then we have other difficulties. Of course, Le Sacre du Printemps stays a difficult piece to keep together. Yeah. And then you have much more difficult pieces, and you have such degrees of difficulty that nobody hears whether anything is right or wrong. Also, this you have in avant-garde music. Yeah. So even the composers don't know. There are very funny stories about composers who were very enthusiastic about performances where all the notes were wrong. So this is the price for new complexity, as we call it. Yeah. But then there are also some people who are fantastic in organizing these extremely, terribly difficult and complex details. You had these composers in the US, Roger Sessions, and particularly Milton Babbitt, or Pierre Boulez as a conductor. I would not say that Pierre Boulez was a very musical person, expressing very beautifully. He was an executor with an incredible exactitude, and this impressed everybody. But when he does Debussy, it is like how do you say, when you have a body and you go to the doctor and you send X-ray through it?
Yeah, yes.
Yes, his Debussy is X-rayed Debussy. His Webern is X-rayed Webern. It doesn't have anything anymore of this original quality. So there was this book by Arthur Laurier, the Russian avant-garde composer, who was a close friend of Scriabin, and he was closest friend of Koussevitzky, and he wrote a biography about Koussevitzky in the beginning of the 1930s. And he would write that Debussy came to Russia, and Koussevitzky let him conduct his orchestra. And then Koussevitzky learned how to conduct Debussy, and he would state precisely that everything is rubato. Then Boulez is totally wrong. Nothing is there. Yeah. So a complete dimension of style is ignored. But that's just as an example. You understand what I mean, yeah?
I do, yes.
Talents are so diverse. Some people have the most incredible talent to hear the slightest differences in tuning. Some people are very rhythmical, but to do all the thing, you must develop lots of things, yeah. And to understand the large organization and architecture of a piece, you must still find something else. And this is interestingly not anymore so clearly traceable in materialist terms, but it depends on the material.
We do have a question.
But to go into that, we would need another session. I can tell you, speaking about the harmonics. But now, what was your next question?
Susan Crawford says, you sound very emotionally connected to music. And you mentioned Stravinsky already, but how do you feel about Stravinsky, who said something to the effect of, "It's not my job for my music to convey anything"? Are you aware of the quote that she's referring to?
I have a very lovely friend who is a kind of rebel and a writer, and he loves Bob Dylan and it's many things which are not so close to me. And so he would ask me, with the Bruckner, he would ask me, what does the music mean? I don't understand. I cannot follow anything. What does the music want to say? I told him, I'm sorry, Wolf, you have to listen. I cannot tell you what it has to say. It is not objects. You can associate something with it, but the music does not say that. Of course, also the composer might have had something in mind. And you have composers like Tchaikovsky, who had lots of things in mind they would not communicate to us. Yeah.
Well, I think that that music doesn't communicate in precise ideas necessarily, but it does communicate emotion. You do feel from music. I feel for music. I guess maybe music has other people thinking, but to me, it's a more direct kind of communication. For me, opera, I have to understand the words when I go to opera. If I can't understand the words, I feel lost. I feel lost in
opera. It's opera, also song. You have to understand the words.
Yeah, but for music, you know, I guess it just makes you feel things. Um, but then the Shostakovich, and there's the Russians, and some of the works that are clearly meant to be political, and
We don't know.
and
We
you
don't know
you
even.
get some of that.
We don't even know that. We know that there is some program music. We know that there are some hidden programs. We know that there are some pretended programs, particularly in fascist states, where people had to say, we had a composer in Germany, Johann Schillencheck, he wrote a so-called Trauer Symphony, a symphony of mourning. And he would say that it was for some people who died under fascists and so on. But he would have written it for his mother who died. But he could not say this in public. Yeah. So there are so many things possible. And with Shostakovich, we have this total double speech, that he is an official person who speaks in an official way, and that he is a person who knows. I would say in Shostakovich, the most interesting thing is in concretely in music is what he doesn't say. The notes he spares away. It's very interesting. You have some quartets. It always aims somewhere and doesn't go there. It always aims somewhere and it doesn't get to the solution. It's like a secret code. But the book by Solomon Volkov, Testimony about Shostakovich, is a fraud. And it made a double history writing. We know that it was just well invented. He knew him well, but the thing we must understand about Soviet system at that time, if he would have said that, he would have been a total idiot. He would have immediately maybe lost his family and been taken to jail. Nobody intelligent, and he was very intelligent, would have offered himself for such a victimization.
I'm looking at a couple of the comments, and we're getting a lot more comments now. Drew Rieger talks about the way Schubert modulated between keys with little or no preparation is one of the techniques used in writing American musical theater. He says, in addition, giving a brilliant quick change of tone, it makes it easy to change vocal ranges quickly between characters so that the narrative keeps moving. That's a complex statement.
Yeah, I mean, Schubert, you can call in a way the greatest genius of modulation. It's incredible what he does, and it is like going on and going on. The only one who did this before him, but not with these far away things so often, is Mozart. With Mozart, you have also constant motion. That means also when you say experiencing music, I would say, don't try to understand it, follow the flow. And the flow is also the harmonic flow. And in Schubert, yes, he was always going into some unprecedented and for the moment unknown directions. Yeah. So like you have the feeling it's an adventure always with his harmony, particularly in the sonata forms in the development section. It's incredible what he does, for example, in these late piano sonatas. Absolutely unbelievable. And it is very difficult. Most pianists are not able to integrate it at all. It's like section separate from the rest.
Yeah. I've never been good at analyzing music. That's one of my flaws in college.
Follow the flow. Follow the flow. It's not, if you don't make music, it's not necessary. Yeah.
Well, no, I did. Basically, I took my early pieces that I'd written to one of the heads of the music department at University of Pennsylvania, and he looked at my music and looked at me and said, "Don't write another note until you learn more." So
you know what Schoenberg said, but you know what Schoenberg said to John Cage?
What?
You will never understand harmony. And then Cage said, "Okay, then I decided to do something else."
Oh, so he went in a different direction. I went in a different direction. I went to musical theater. I was writing classical piano pieces, but gave that up. So let me ask the room, like, Drew, you have a lot of things that you want to say, and Steve, you seem to have a lot of things that you want to say. Did you want to turn on your mics and say anything to Christoph, or do you want, I could wrap up right now and then we could stay a little
Yeah,
longer.
this is Drew. I
I
think
don't
that
see you. I
we
don't see
hello,
you.
hello. We've talked a lot about the meaning of a piece of music, and I think that that can really be informed by studying the culture and the time period in which it was written. You know, what were the political movements? What was the poetry like? What was the interior design like? What had just happened in the world? And, you know, of course, each piece of music that's written is based on earlier pieces of music that broke ground harmonically or melodically or whatever. And then I would even say that the language a composer spoke influences the way they write the music. For example, Italian has long vowel sounds often at the end of a word that can be drawn out in a melodic melisma that is very lyrical, and so it lends itself to opera. Whereas German, I speak German, is the syllables are shorter, more direct, and often with huge jumps in like inherent melody in the language. So a composer like Beethoven is thinking like a German, where he uses small motives with huge melodic jumps that allow this development that happens in his symphonies that you just don't find in like Verdi at the time, for example, which is more melody based. So I think looking at all these aspects of the culture really inform the way you approach it and what it may mean, or what was the intellectual basis for its composition.
The
Yes, yes.
the mystery to me is still how you can always can you always be successful in as a composer in communicating the feeling that you intend to feel, intend to communicate.
Mhm.
It seems like it's a it's a
And,
crapshoot.
and as far as American musical theater goes, English is a wonderful language to write musical theater in because it has so many words. It has many more words than German does. Because of the Norman conquest, you know, we got tons of Romance language words in a basically Germanic language, and we don't have the stricture of word order. In German, in past tense, for example, you have to put the verb at the end of the sentence, so it limits how you can rhyme. English gives you so many more opportunities to rhyme a line, and you know, musical theater is so text based, unlike opera, which is more, you know, musical and lyrical and orchestration based.
Yes,
You know, it's
I mean,
not as dense.
I would say with pop song or with rock music, you have it very obviously that in German it sounds almost ridiculous most of the time. Even these very romantic things sound very cliche-like very often.
Hmm.
So you have, I would say, the English language is a little bit more restrained emotionally than the German,
Hmm.
and therefore it's better suited to get to not slide into sentimentality. And so you have all these fantastic rock songs of the 70s, of the 60s, of the, yeah, all these things in German, they sound a bit, yeah, how to say, uh, without raffinesse, at least. Yeah. But I would, Drew, I totally agree with the epoch, with with the other arts. This is what many people say. Therefore, I spare from my side to speak about that because these advices are given everywhere. The danger with these advices is that we get into the convention of the time, but we don't understand the real great people there from that point of view. That means, for example, Mozart. When you say, uh, does the composer know whether he can communicate what he wants to say to the public? He always did. He had that freedom. And when you listen to Mozart's Così fan tutte or Don Giovanni or the Le Nozze di Figaro or Zauberflöte, it is so direct, it cannot be more direct with the most sophisticated language possible. And we cannot explain him from his time. But on the other side, today it would be very difficult for Mozart in the climate of as it was particularly in the years of radical modernism after the Second World War. One would have accused him of being an imitator of Haydn, because all this pure avant-garde thinking made it a kind of ideological question, whether you are a good composer or not. You belong to the new world or not. Yeah. So many things change in time, and all these things are very interesting to see. Beethoven was always a revolutionary in his time, and he would have later definitely also been. So he is always on the secure side concerning these things.
And I think with Beethoven, he never considered himself an employee of any aristocrat. He was an artist in his own right, unlike Haydn. Even Mozart worked for the Archbishop of Salzburg and, for the Emperor of Austria, even though he was kind of a revolutionary with some of the work he did in opera. But Beethoven refused to bow down to any wealthy family in Europe and really made his own chart as an artist.
He had his people who were paying a lot of money to him, these counts and so. So he was also not independent. He tried to keep it out of the official business, so to say, and he would not be affiliated to the church and to the courts. That's true, but
he also made money from publishing, unlike the earlier.
Okay, I'm gonna jump in because I've got to wrap up.
Yeah, but Mozart it's a much more subtle revolution, like Schubert also is. Beethoven is obviously a revolutionary, like Wagner.
For sure.
Yeah,
and Wagner, by the way, is very important for American musical theater with his idea of leitmotifs, which a lot of composers use today to develop a character. You have a melody associated with a character.
Yo,
and you develop that.
And
Yeah. Well,
guys, I'm sorry. We don't have to close up. I just need to end the YouTube pod. We're not a podcast. It's the YouTube video. So, Christoph, my main intention was to look at the similarities and dissimilarities between classical music conducting and theater. I still see the similarities. I still see you as an amazing director who's sort of in charge of a huge production with so many moving parts, and you manage to wrangle them all together and create something coherent and something that communicates. I find that fascinating. I find it interesting. It's nothing I would ever imagine myself ever being able to do. So kudos to you for what you do and for being as successful as you are with what you do.
Thank
amazing.
you. May I say a few final words?
Yes, absolutely.
So I would say that in the arts and in music also, and in many other things, we have a lot of corpses in the basement. Yeah. And this is a very toxic situation. We don't know it. We are living on piles of corpses. And so I've always saw it as my particular distinction in this field to get them out into life again. And this was always my vision, to put them alongside those who are already there and we know them. And I think we found a lot of really great stuff. It should not be something that is forgotten rightly. Yeah. And the other thing you wanted to know about the dramaturgy of an album, that I would just say in short, in school in the 1970s, I was a great fan of King Crimson and of this kind of progressive rock. And I learned from these people that they put together albums that were, but the intention was you listen from beginning to end, and it's not just putting together some pieces, but that there is a dramaturgy that follows through oppositions and to the contrasts and to, so finally that you have, if the album is really good, you have the feeling that from the beginning to the end, it's like another composition. And this idea stayed with me. And I saw that in classical music, it almost does not exist. And so I've always tried to get deeper and deeper in this kind of, what can we combine in the best possible way that everything shines out and it makes sense as a whole, which is not a thing you can prove.
Well, thank you. Let's consider those final words for today for some thought.
And there we are close to theater.
I maintain that. Yes, I think that there are definite connections. I'm going to go off for a second back into speaker view. It's a good time for me to do this because the sun is beginning to come through my window and just take over the screen that I'm on. So everybody out there, I want to thank you all for being with us. Christoph, first of all, Christoph Schlüren, who came to us from Munich and who is actually speaking to us at like 12:30, 1 o'clock in the morning. Thank you for doing this. I appreciate it very much. Everybody in the room, thank you for coming and always being attentive and being a vibrant community. I'm very proud of my community. And for those of you who are discovering us out there on YouTube or our podcast, I would love you to be part of the room. I'd love you to come in. I'd love you to be with us so that you can actually ask questions and be part of the conversation. And I can make that happen. All you have to do is email me at trunltd@aol.com, trunltd@aol.com, and I will invite you, and you can come join us. Next week we have a small theater company from Tennessee called STAR, STAAR, and an interesting woman who has been running that company. We're going to talk to her about what it's like being a small theater company in Tennessee, in a small community. And then after that, going to make a big jump to Joanna Gleason. We're going to interview Tony winner Joanna Gleason here. So join us. You're always welcome to come for free. Everybody, many of you, most of you come for free. If you want to help us financially so that we can keep going and keep doing this, consider a donation or consider joining as a member of TRU. And you can do that by going to TRU Donate, trudonate.com, trudonate.com. Anything you can give us would be welcome, and I would appreciate. That's it for this week. I hope to see you in the next coming weeks. Next week, guys, it's 206th. I'm just going to keep going and going and going. I don't think I'll ever stop doing this. I love being able to interview people, and I love being able to have a community that comes in every week and that I can be proud of. So thank you all for what you all do. And that's it.
Thank you.